Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 edition of the Kesterton Lecture. This is the main annual keynote for Carleton University's School of Journalism and Communication. My name is Alan Thompson. I'm the head of the journalism program here at Carleton. As such, it's my job to welcome you here to the Dominion Chalmers Centre, the jewel in the crown of Carleton's facilities. I'm also here to launch us into tonight's keynote by Jordan Bitov, The Truth We Need for the World We Want. First, I would like to acknowledge the land on which we gather this evening. As you well know, we hear these acknowledgements more and more often these days, but I'm increasingly conscious as someone who is called upon to make these land acknowledgements that they sometimes seem to be much more for the white audience to justify or maybe soothe our racial guilt, instead of the original intended purpose, and that is to acknowledge and honor people and the treaty agreements and unceded lands that we occupy. So please, don't see this as a box that we tick tonight. As journalists in training or folks with a keen interest in journalism, we need to use this moment as a reminder to prioritize our individual commitments to challenge and dismantle white supremacist colonial mindsets, which we have internalized, both collectively and individually, in the School of Journalism itself and in the wider journalism industry in Canada. I know acknowledgements can be seen as just words, but they are important words, and words made more powerful if they're accompanied by action. On that note, I am pleased to share that the School of Journalism and Communication at Carleton is about to launch a new full-time position for Indigenous journalism and storytelling, a post that will be filled by the award-winning CBC journalist, Duncan McHugh. I'm clapping on the inside. In addition to joining the journalism faculty at Carleton, Duncan will be working with colleagues on an ambitious project to deliver a journalism skills training program on the ground in Indigenous communities. So with that, I would like to acknowledge that today we live, gather, and organize on the unceded and traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. In just a moment, I'll provide you with a bit of an outline of tonight's event. But first, I would like to invite Dr. Brenda O'Neill, the Dean of the Faculty of Public Affairs, to say a few words of welcome. Brenda.
Thanks very much, Alan, and good evening, everyone. As Alan said, I'm Brenda O'Neill. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Public Affairs, the academic home for Carleton's renowned School of Journalism and Communication. Carleton's Faculty of Public Affairs is the only one of its kind in Canada in its name. The faculty was created 25 years ago to bring together academic units that were working in the areas of governance and civil society, and journalism's at the top of that list. Our graduates go on to work in the news media, as politicians, as economists, as social workers, and so much more. Carleton's location in the national capital provides our students with unparalleled access to the news media, the federal government, Parliament Hill, NGOs, the diplomatic community, and so much more. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that this spectacular venue provides an inspiring platform for tonight's conversation. Events like this one help to fulfill one of the faculty's most important mandates, and that's to foster public discourse on critical issues of the day. And I'm sure, as everyone here would agree, quality journalism is one of the cornerstones of our democracy. But journalism, just like so many aspects of our democracy, is facing disruptions that we've not seen in our lifetime, if ever. It's our duty to confront these disruptions head on. Our students are relying on us to prepare them for who they will become in this new world. Events like the Kesterton Lecture provide a venue for those vital conversations that'll help us track where we want to be in 5 or 10 years' time. On behalf of Carleton University and the Faculty of Public Affairs, let me thank you for taking the time to join us this evening, both in person and to those of you who are online. And a very special thank you to our Kesterton Lecturer, the Toronto Star's Jordan Beethoven, for what I'm sure is going to be a very thought-provoking presentation. So thank you and enjoy the evening.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Thanks for all your support for the journalism program and events like this one. It matters. These days, it really matters. Another important part of this evening's proceedings is an introduction to the winner of this year's R. James Travers Foreign Corresponding Fellowship. This is something that it's become part of the tradition of the Kesterton to introduce this year's winner. The fellowship was established a decade ago after the untimely 2011 death of the legendary Jim Travers. Jim left his mark on Canadian journalism as a longtime foreign correspondent, columnist, and senior editor. Jim rounded out his career in the senior leadership of the Toronto Star, where I had the good fortune to work alongside him in the Star's Ottawa Bureau. I'd like to call upon my colleague, Carleton Professor Susan Harada, who is also the co-chair of the Fellowship Steering Committee, to introduce this year's winner. Susan.
Thank you, Alan, and good evening, everyone. I'm glad to see Alan pointed out there's a box behind this lectern for people of my height. Jim Travers and his connection to the Star is key to tonight. Jim left us suddenly and much too soon, but the fellowship that was set up in his name keeps the spirit of his journalism alive, and he would be very proud of what has been accomplished in his name. While we've awarded the $25,000 fellowship to journalists from a range of news organizations over the years, it's fitting to mention tonight that Star journalists have actually won it 3 times and used it to produce some very powerful journalism. Marko Chonovid reported on mining and international aid. Sara Mojtahedzadeh, with photographer Melissa Renwick, reported on Mexican migrant workers and their families and the Canadian Migrant Worker Program. And just last month, the Star published the first of an international 3-part series about policing and crime by Wendy Gillis. Our latest winner is not with the Star, but the story she plans to tell will be just as powerful. She couldn't join us in person tonight, so here's a video now of Stephanie Dubois, a CBC journalist and freelance writer based in Edmonton. She has some details about where her 2023 Travers Fellowship will take her.
Hi everyone. I'm really grateful to be this year's recipient of the R. James Travers Foreign Corresponding Fellowship. Thanks to the fellowship, I'll be traveling to the Philippines to report on the recruitment of Filipino nurses. For months now, we've heard of growing wait times at emergency departments across the country and other issues within our healthcare system. Many have said Canada's healthcare system is in crisis. And we know that part of the reason why is staff shortages. In many cases, specifically a shortage of nurses. So to fill the gaps, politicians in several provinces announced they'll be recruiting nurses from the Philippines. Some provincial leaders have already been, while others are still planning their trips. For decades, the Philippines has seen richer countries like Canada come to recruit its nurses. But today, the Philippines is in a different situation with nurse supply. These international hiring efforts come at a time when the Philippines is struggling with its own substantial shortage of nurses. And this shortage has a direct impact on Filipino patients and their care. Jim Travers was a huge believer that stories beyond our borders should be shared. He believed that being on the ground, telling the stories of people who might not otherwise have a voice is extremely valuable, and that context matters. And I couldn't agree more. That's why I'll be traveling to rural and urban areas to hear from Filipino nurses, local recruiters, Filipino health officials, and patients. These are perspectives that I believe are missing from the current coverage and deserve more attention. There are many questions to be answered about the impact of these recruitment efforts. For example, what are the effects on Filipinos? And importantly, what does it say about us as a country if we take what we need from a lower income country that is also struggling to keep its nurses? We need that context. And I think it's important to take the coverage of these trips beyond Canadian politicians' recruitment efforts. There are people affected by these decisions, and I look forward to sharing their stories through the fellowship. Thank you for your time and enjoy the event.
Thank you, Susan, and congratulations, Stephanie. We've been holding this annual lecture in honor of Wilf Kesterton since the year 2000. First, I would like to ask for a show of hands. How many people here this evening knew Wilf? Good. I don't feel so old. When I was a journalism student at Carleton in the early 1980s, Wilf was still a force to be reckoned with as an emeritus professor. I had the honor of having him serve on the exam board for my honors research project. In attending this event over the years, it sometimes occurred to me that we make reference to Wilf Kesterton and assume people know all about the person that we're celebrating. So just a reminder, Wilfred Kesterton was born in Regina in 1914. He was a school teacher when he enlisted in the armed forces and served in England and Holland. As a Second World War veteran, he enrolled in Carleton's fledgling journalism school and became one of the earliest graduates of the new Bachelor of Journalism program in 1949. He was hired immediately as one of the first professors in the School of Journalism, in fact, the second full-time faculty member. In the next 4 decades, Wilf Kesterton would shape the institution. Until his retirement in 1979, he taught virtually every student who went through our program. Nowadays, when we teach, we get a photo class list of our students, so we can kind of cheat and try to learn who they are. That didn't exist in Wilf's era. Wilf created his own photo class list. He would take Polaroids of his students and put them in a file so he could remember who his students were when they would contact him years later. Through his writing and his research, he also helped define Canadian journalism as one of the first to bring serious scholarly attention to the news media in this country. He literally wrote the book on journalism in this country with the 1967 publication, The History of Journalism in Canada, the first of its kind. It is important that we enshrine his memory with an annual event to reflect on some aspect of the current state of journalism in this country. I'm confident that tonight's installment will be an important addition. Our moderator, Nala Ayed, will properly introduce our keynote in just a moment, but I hope you will allow me to set the stage. And full disclaimer, the Toronto Star shaped my journalism career and that of a number of people I see here in the room. I arrived at 1 Yonge Street as a summer student in 1986, fresh from Carleton, and spent the next 18 years at the Star. On arrival at 1 Yonge in the spring of 1986, I was awestruck by a newsroom that seemed to be, in fact was, the size of a football field, a newsroom that was teeming with hundreds of journalists. Yes, hundreds of journalists in one newsroom. On my most recent and last visit to 1 Yonge this past fall, you could feel the ghosts in that place. There was a farewell party of sorts in the empty newsroom to mark the Star's move to new premises across town. The man in charge of that move, indeed the man who is now in charge of everything that moves at Canada's largest circulation daily newspaper, was Jordan Bittov. Several things jump out at me about Jordan Bittov, and to my mind, make his remarks tonight so important. He literally fought a battle. He fought a court battle to assume full control of the Toronto Star and its parent company, Torstar, and other media holdings. That makes him the first person since the Star's de facto founder, Joe Atkinson, to have full control of the operation. During that battle with his former business partner, Jordan self-identified as the champion of quality journalism, assuming the mantle, if you will, of the late John Hondrick. The Hondrick family made sure, through thick and thin, the Star continued to pump resources, some would say outsized resources, into news gathering, even in later years, while the Star endured the deep cuts that were sweeping the newspaper industry. I think it's worth noting that despite their contributions to journalism and the Star, the Hondrick family never had the kind of total grip on the company that Jordan now enjoys. As you know from the promotional material, Jordan's lecture is titled, "The Truth We Need for the World We Want." In some of our earlier discussions about this event, I suggested, only half joking, that the lecture could have the title, "If the Toronto Star Doesn't Make It, We're All in Trouble." Jordan, it is not an easy time to present yourself as the champion of quality journalism in this country. We wish you well and hope dearly that you will continue to employ many of our graduates and have a positive impact on the future of our industry. But we are also here to hold your feet to the fire, to make sure that you deliver on the lofty mantle that you have assumed as a champion of quality journalism. It's very appropriate that this evening's event will be moderated by one of Canada's best-known journalists and a proud Carleton grad, the CBC's Nala Ayed. Nala was born in Winnipeg to Palestinian parents. She spent part of her childhood in the Middle East. She began her career as a reporter on Parliament Hill with the Canadian Press. I think that's when we first met. In 2002, Nala joined the CBC and reported from Amman, Baghdad, Beirut, and across the region, later spent close to a decade covering world events from London. In 2012, she published her award-winning memoir, 1,000 Farewells. She's now the host of CBC's radio nightly program, Ideas. Nala, we're lucky to have you join us this evening. Nala will formally introduce our guest speaker, engage him in a conversation here following Jordan's presentation, and take your questions from the floor. Just a reminder to those watching on Zoom, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to pose a question. I'll be monitoring those, and I think I'm going to pass them on to Nala through the wonders of text messaging. In just a moment, I'll invite Nala to come to the stage and introduce Jordan to deliver his lecture from the podium. Then he and Nala will have their discussion, and then the Q&A. At the end of the evening, you are invited to join us for a reception across the hall, right where you came in. Washrooms are just back there near the entrance, and in the rare event of an emergency, you can leave the building the way you came in. You can also go straight out the back or out this door as well, if there happened to be an emergency. With that, I would like to invite Nala Ayed to properly introduce this year's Kesterton Lecturer. Nala.
Thank you very much, Alan, for the lovely introduction. Thank you to all of you for being here tonight. It's really wonderful to be here, not just at a Carleton event, but specifically at the Kesterton Lecture. It means a lot to me as well. I want to just tell you that tonight's proceedings are being recorded for possible broadcast on Ideas, which is usually at 8 p.m. every night, weekdays on CBC Radio, and podcast. It was on November 24th, 2022, that Jordan Bitoff took control of Canada's largest newspaper, the Toronto Star. He is publisher and sole owner of the Star, of Torstar Corporation, and CEO of Nordstar Capital. Many Canadians, of course, will already know Jordan's name for his role in the realm of sports, helping launch the Toronto Raptors basketball team, the first NBA franchise awarded outside the United States. He was also part of the ownership consortium that built the Skydome, now Rogers Centre, and he also helped orchestrate Toronto's bid for the 2008 Olympics. Now he stepped into the top role at a top newspaper in an industry that is very much at a crossroads and in many crosshairs. It's not Jordan's first foray into the realm of newspapers. His career includes ownership of 80 newspapers, as well as interests in technology, real estate, hospitality, natural resources, and distribution. In 1998, he founded Vision Companies, an experiential marketing company, and he also founded Great Moments in Catering in 1990, which became Canada's largest privately held event catering company. Beyond that, Jordan Bitov has served on several boards, including the Board of Trustees for Sick Kids Foundation and the Toronto International Film Festival, and for the Right to Play. In 2012, he was a recipient of the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal for his philanthropic work. Jordan is a graduate of Western University and holds the position of Honorary Consul to the Republic of North Macedonia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jordan Bitov.
Journalism is as important and imperative today as it ever has been.
The right to freedom, democracy, and self-determination. Banks like RBC offer.
We need.
Truth we need.
Truth we need.
Truth we need.
And I look at this incredible room, and I think it is a wonderful metaphor for what we're trying to do at Torstar. This was a place that was used one day a week, that had a limited amount of use and audience, and now Carleton has taken it over, and events are running here, and there's a resurrection here. And that's really what we're trying to do at Torstar. So a little bit of a metaphor, but now I'll begin with my remarks, and I have one very important announcement to make, and that is Ravens rule. I couldn't start without mentioning that. As you heard, I'm a Hoops fan, and the Ravens have really done the unimaginable in this country, and even our friend Scotty Barnes acknowledges it. It's great to be here. The Carleton School of Journalism and Communication has produced some of the greatest in its field since the 1940s. Just a few whose names, and you'll see them all there, Andrew Chang, Arthur Kent, you might know from their work at the CBC and of course at the Toronto Star. Beyond alumni, this program has attracted many notable fellows. In particular, and we did talk about the late Jim Travers, a former executive managing editor of the Toronto Star and an award-winning national affairs columnist for us. Jim believed in providing critical coverage of stories outside of Canadian borders, and I'm honored he is part of the Toronto Star's history and legacy and has gone to support the future of a generation of journalists. We're here today because we posed the question, imagine a world without journalism. A few years ago, that might have sounded melodramatic, but there are real alarm bells now, and we better be paying attention. So for the next few minutes, I want to talk with you about three things. One, first, how trusted media outlets play a critical role in defending democracy and informing our communities, and what's challenging us to uphold that role. Number two, I'll touch on what we and other Canadian media outlets are doing right now to counter the threat of disappearing headlines. And three, I'll share some numbers and suggest what you can do to help protect trusted journalism in Canada, because I believe we can shift the narrative from what if it all goes away to what if we build it back and thrive. First of all, let me say I'm not a journalist. The closest I ever came to it is I was a newspaper boy at a very young age, and I had a very large route. But it was at that point that I fell in love with print. And it was a Toronto Star route. It morphed into a Globe in Toronto. I was 12 to 16 years of age that I had it, and it helped pay for a lot of things in my life. But I learned to fall in love with print at that point in time. I'm a father, I have 4 young children, and I'm a fan of our country and our province. And I'm a passionate believer in journalism and its power to inform, champion, and challenge us for a better society. So when I learned the Star was struggling a few years back, I reached out to the late John Hondrick, who was the chair, and with a proposal that I would buy the Star. And I was honored, and quite frankly, I was a little surprised that he met with me. And we had a wonderful discussion about media, and he gave me a book at that point in time, Humanity Above All, and I took it home that night, and I have to tell you that the impact that it had on me and my life, I get emotional talking about it, was quite remarkable. It talked about 110 years of what the Toronto Star had accomplished. At that time, I thought the Star's challenge and the challenge of the other Tour Star publication was its digital transformation, an area we've really made incredible strides on over the past 2.5 years. But the big issue wasn't lagging tech, it was big tech, and the dramatic shift of ad dollars from content publishers to content providers such as Google, Meta, and Twitter. Today, over 80% of our digital ad dollars go to tech companies due to the monopolies they have over our audiences. Money that's not only leaving our country, but also has implications on Canadian media, specifically in our newsrooms. And that's the challenge. The advertising revenue that once funded our newsrooms has been moved, ironically, to companies that use our content for their benefit. Oh, and did I mention, those companies don't want us to pay for it, don't want to pay us for it? The result is that we are seeing local news disappear by increments. Disappear substantially enough that a group started mapping losses. The News Poverty Map tracks 361 news outlets closed across Canada since 2008. You can see it on the board here. The Canadian Media Directors Council tracks the number even higher. 448 news outlets closed in 323 communities. 323 communities do not have news outlets. 53 media outlets shuttered in the last 2 years alone. Over 3,000 editorial and non-editorial jobs lost since 2020. That's only 3 years. And more if we count recent layoffs. What it means is that we have a significant gap in local information and accountability. This happens across the country. Not just the smaller markets, but major cities are seeing hits too. And let's use Ottawa as the example. 6 years ago, there was a closure of 9 community newspapers in the region. The Ottawa Citizen is down from hundreds of reporters a few years ago to just 25 today. And the recent losses at Chorus laid a direct hit on global news here. quite notably by including award-winning journalist Rachel Gilmore in its cuts. Ottawa is not a news desert. But what's happening here is a clarion call. We should be concerned when a market of this size and in our nation's capital risks losing local context. Fewer reporters means fewer stories and tighter coverage. The empty seats designated for reporters at City Hall, in Parliament, and local courts are not going to be filled by message boards and isolated interest groups. Fact-checked, investigated, accountable truths, the stories that inform civil discourse, how we vote, what is happening in schools, hospitals, in the offices of influence, and on our streets. This comes from journalists, from real people putting a ton of effort into keeping citizens informed. Issues I know you're actively involved in addressing: EDI, climate change, supporting Canadian business and communities. So much of the insight and awareness that informs your work is a result of journalists digging in on these issues. I'm going to use the star as a proxy for imagining a world without journalism. If we didn't have journalism, would Torontonians have enough insight to cast their ballot in the next civic election, and probably one of the most important elections that our city is facing? Or enough information to even care about voting? Voter turnout in the last election was abysmal. Would citizens be aware of how often police breach Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and what the implications are for our justice system? Would the parents of Nathaniel McLennan still be suspects in their toddler's death? And would the woman now charged with manslaughter be free? Without trusted, accountable journalism, how are we going to counter the misinformation and disinformation that has come to dominate discussion and impact our society and public discourse? When Joe Rogan gives a massive platform to fact deniers and conspiracy theorists, is that the kind of world we want? When George Santos finds a seat in the United States government because there are not enough news outlets to pick up on questions raised by a small community newspaper? When Google and Meta want to block news from trusted sources to avoid paying for it under the new Bill C-18? These are very scary things to consider in terms of our ability to access trusted sources of information. The fact is, real journalism costs money. Technology is not going to break a story, or uncover a hidden truth, or give local context on a national situation. Google, Meta, ChatGPT, all tech companies that depend on a source of origin for content, it is based on someone who does the work. Our newsrooms are that source, the people who are doing the work. To underscore some of that work, let's take a closer look at the series on charter breaches. Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms has been in place for over 40 years. The stars Rachel Mendelson and Steve Buist of the Hamilton Spectator set out to see how often police violated people's Charter of Rights and what's being done about it. They used legal databases to scour thousands of criminal cases, isolating breaches that were serious enough to threaten public confidence in our justice system. The team uncovered 600 serious charter breaches cases where judges had to exclude crucial evidence from the trial, drop charges, or throw out cases altogether because of things like unjustified vehicle stops, violent arrests, and illegal searches. A quarter of the cases were identified with the assistance of Western University Law and their Hidden Racial Profiling Project. They worked with our reporters and shared their case law. As a result of the investigative series, police forces are making efforts to improve accountability and transparency. Toronto police acknowledge they were unaware of more than 90 cases that the journalists uncovered and launched an internal review. Rachel, Steve, our designers and editors were awarded the prestigious Sidney Hillman Canadian Prize for Excellence in Journalism in Service of the Common Good. In fact, they're collecting that prize this very week. Now, Knowing what we're up against, what are Canadian media doing to keep local news from disappearing? At Torstar, we're putting a keen focus on the pillars that matter: local news, groundbreaking investigations, and digital growth. We've improved, and we continue to improve, our digital platforms and products, so our readers have a better experience and our ad performance is more compelling for advertisers. We brought back the Star's paid intern program. It was canceled 4 years ago. We brought it back, and today, over 14 of those students that came into that program are now full-time journalists. And what is good about that is we're bringing diversity into our newsroom. I know there are many journalism students here in the audience tonight and maybe online. I encourage you to apply and come and talk to us about our intern program, and I think you'll find it quite rewarding. We are focused on giving readers great local coverage and insightful journalism. By striving for world-class content, we grow our base of engaged readers, build our data sets, and ultimately help marketers reach people they're looking for the way they want to. Now, earlier I touched on shared values. I know you are champions for a better way. Your passion to get to the truth, and you're here, your presence here tells me that. And most companies in Canada are trying to champion a better Canada too. Yet there is a major piece missing. Where is the support for local media? When governments and businesses espouse to support communities, why is local news not a part of it? When climate change, health, reconciliation, equity, diversity, and inclusion are priorities, how can Canadian media be overlooked? People have never had more options and interest in news, yet the revenue to support trusted outlets has never been lower. And this needs to change. Over the past few years, advertising support for local news has cratered. That's what it looks like for the Star. And you see the same trajectory for just about every single news outlet in this country. Now, I won't name names, but as an example, one of Canada's leading institutions whose values are 100% aligned with our company spent $50 million in advertising last year. And what did they spend with us? Less than $7,000, or 0.1013%. And this isn't an isolated example. There are dozens of big companies and hundreds of smaller businesses that just don't invest in Canadian media at all. And I'm not being dramatic here. This is a fact. The numbers speak for themselves. And this impact on newsroom is devastating. Even when Canadian media outlets are included on advertising plan, as they should be, when it comes to the federal government, very little of the money is going to local news. One would think the federal government, with the support of Bill C-18 and other pieces of legislation, would put their advertising dollars where their mouth is. In their last report, they claimed an advertising spend of just over $140 million to reach Canadians on topics like COVID, reconciliation, equality, climate change, affordability, healthcare, and many other important issues. Factoring in digital and print for the Star, our 6 other dailies and 70 community news platforms, the Government of Canada invested 0.27%, less than $400,000 on a $140 million budget. Now you can tell me that voters and citizens aren't reading our content, but I know they are. And I see the page views every day. So this brings me to my last point. What can you do? You can embrace an ethical media supply chain. Now, I'm borrowing a phrase from a colleague. An ethical media supply chain supports Canadian-owned and operated and trusted news. An ethical media supply chain prioritizes keeping money in Canada. It prioritizes media integrity. Every dollar stays in Canada. Every dollar stays here to support and strengthen local journalism, and every click is a human click. It's like a flywheel. Ethical ad investment stays in Canada, funds trusted journalism that attracts readers, supports our shared values, and gives marketers a halo effect from being around compelling local news. At Torstar, I can assure you, each dollar that comes to us goes back to support local journalism, and we are doing all we can as partners to make your click counts. Now, to be clear, this is not a charitable appeal. This is a partnership and a call to action. This is about making a difference together. Now, I know you aren't afraid to ask questions, so find out what organizations you are a part of and the companies that you deal with and how they allocate their advertising dollars. And ask them what percentage of their media spend goes to supporting Canadian-owned and operated media. If it's not 20%, it's not good enough. Whether it's Torstar, The Citizen, or CP24, trusted local news delivers the audience they want when we are ready to partner with marketers to deliver. And now the governments need to do their part as well. We appreciate the federal legislation, but it's just not enough to actually grow the media industry in Canada. When I gave the example earlier, Torstar got 0.25% of the federal government's buy. If that percentage went up to 2 or even 5%, think what a difference that revenue could make when we put it towards journalism. I know I've talked a lot about ad spend, and here's another key component of our future success: subscriptions, and in particular, digital subscriptions. Digital subscriptions are the driving force today behind the media industry's ability to transform. We have the data that proves people with paid news subscriptions are more engaged in their communities and their work. Go back to your campus, to your office, and ask your friends and instructors if they have a paid subscription to a Canadian news organization, and if not, why. Whatever way you can, question businesses, pay for subscriptions, and have this conversation with your peers and family. Let's embrace an ethical media supply chain and support Canadian media. Now, in summary, trusted media outlets play a critical role in defending democracy and informing our communities, yet we are losing revenue to foreign players, challenging us to uphold our role as more job losses and closures are a real threat. We're not backing down, quite the converse. We're facing these challenges by focusing on local news, investigative journalism, and a great digital experience for our readers and partners. We're earning the investment of subscribers and advertisers. And you can absolutely play a part in this. Promote and invest in the ethical media supply, subscribe to local news, talk to everyone you know about what's at risk. And when you walk out of this room, what are you going to do about it? If enough of us raise our voices, we can be heard. And that whole what if scenario, it doesn't have to be a threat, imagining the worst. With the right focus, what if can mean the possibility. So, I want to hear from the room what we can do to protect a free and fair media for our country. What's important to you? Now, I read my speech 10 times, and late last night I'm reading again, and I'm thinking, for those of you that are in the field of journalism, I may be sounding a little bit like Debbie Downer here, and those that want to go into it. But I can tell you, in just over 2 years, I've realized the importance of trusted journalism. Our journalists are heroes. The work that they do has an impact on society and democracy. And if you have any doubts about this as a career, I would encourage you to think about this, that the work you do, day in and day out, protects the vulnerable, gives voices to those who may not be heard, holds big business and government to account, and keeps our citizens and country informed and involved in the things that matter to all of us. Thank you.
So there's going to be a bit of an awkward transition right now as we get Nala and Jordan seated and mic'd. talk among yourselves for a moment. Think of your questions. So Nala and Jordan are going to have a guided discussion for 20 minutes or so. We do have 2 microphones. You'll see them here sort of by the cameras on the floor. So once Nala's had a go at Jordan, then we're going to open the floor to questions as well, and Nala is going to navigate that. I am also going to be monitoring the questions that are coming in on the webinar, and I'll be sending questions to Nala, and she'll be able to put those to Jordan as well. So I think we're all set.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you very much for your lecture. Really insightful and interesting. And can you hear me all right? No, not yet. So we'll wait to see if that gets adjusted. There we go. All right. Thank you once again for your address. You've been on quite a journey, starting as a paperboy, now the sole owner and publisher of the Toronto Star, and you're talking now about resurrection. I wonder if you could expand a little bit more of your vision of what you think the responsibility of an owner and a publisher is, given that the media landscape is as potholed as it is right now.
Great question, and I apologize for being emotional. You've probably read about me getting emotional with my team and with the organization, but when you see the quality of work that our team and other news organizations do day in and day out, and you question what happens if those journalists are not around, you become very concerned about society. And as the father of 4 young children, this is the thing that keeps me awake at night. And I talk a lot about technology and the negativity, the impact that that's having on our kids, on society. We hear, with what's going on with TikTok right now, and the fact that the company that owns TikTok in China only allows their own kids to go on 1 hour a day on TikTok. And yet we allow our kids to go on for 14 hours or 20 hours a day. But to answer your question, I swallowed the pill very quickly and saw the impact and the power. And what I realized going into it as we were doing our due diligence and understanding was that we were way behind. We were having a conversation earlier about the tablet program. In 2015, the Star spent $40 million, Torstar did, to launch a tablet, which they thought was going to be the future of journalism, and it was an abysmal failure. $40 million, 200 jobs, flushed down a year and a half into it. And I think through that, they just, they were afraid of their own shadow. And so as that was going on, there was this sort of, let's burn the furniture, we have to protect print. But what they'd forgotten about was the digital transformation, and what the digital transformation was, how you get someone that may be reading your print paper to go online. You don't need to move them all the way to a mobile phone but there is an e-reader product, there are other products, and it's how you educate, how you engage with other audience, what technology, podcasts, right? We're going heavy into podcasts now, video, other things to engage other audience. And so saw that as an amazing opportunity. And what I'm proudest, perhaps, of my team is the fact that we're close to 200,000 digital subscribers in just over 2 years. Right. Quite remarkable. And yet, and I'm told, we are the best performing print organization in North America. Why? Because we made a conscious decision to protect print. I'm a print guy, and it's still a very lucrative part of the business.
So let me ask you this, to interrupt you there, but I noticed one thing in your speech is that the only time you, in relation to the Toronto Star, that you said the word newspaper was near the beginning when you talked about being a paper boy. Was that deliberate?
Yeah, because we are trying to change the perception. I talk to the team a lot that we've been doing something that's been around for 100 years, and we're doing it the same way. We have to produce a business section. We have to produce a sports section. And what we're seeing is the world is passing us by, and there are other ways to have engagement through that. I love print. I read it every day. I'm loyal. I have been for decades. But what I'm trying to help have our organization, and we just moved to our new offices at 8 Spadina, which is Netflix is there, all the tech companies are there, is for people to understand that we're evolving into a technology company, but not, we just closed down our printing presses. We didn't close them down. We sold those assets off to Transcon, who are the largest print producer in the world. Why? Because we shouldn't be. We should be focusing on journalism, producing great journalism. We don't need to be printing newspapers, and then how do we keep that business going 24/7? And so very focused on digital and on technology, but not forgetting the print reader and the importance of that.
Can you envision a day when, I'm sure you can actually, can you imagine how close it might be that the business model will not include print?
Yeah, there have been reports that in the U.S. through the New York Times and others that basically say within 15 years we won't have print. But I don't agree with that, because I think and I spent a lot of time talking, I mentioned to you before, talking to A.G. Salzberger at the New York Times, Marty Barron at the Washington Post about it. The Toronto Star was 1.5 million, almost 2 million subscribers at one point in time. Those days are never going to come back. So what we need to do is understand that we own a niche in the marketplace. We are a progressive publication, and we are the voice of a progressive group in the country, and we need to deliver a great product to that. And so maybe we're not going to have 1.5 million, maybe we're going to have 300,000, and maybe those people will pay a little bit more of a premium to have access to that quality of journalism.
Just on that point, actually, it's a question that's come up in conversations. The Toronto Star is known generally to be a center-left progressive voice. You have contributed to conservative politicians in the past. What does a paper look like, the Toronto Star, in the Jordan Bittov era?
It's a great question, I'm almost appreciative that you're asking it, because it's one of the issues that I have with technology and Twitter and Facebook and all these things where people will anonymously post something about my donations or whatever. I have donated to. I donate to the person, okay, and not necessarily to a party. And I have, and I'm proud of that. I've been loyal to great candidates all over the place, and so I would be a fool from the business point of view, but also when I talk about about Canada, to move the paper away from where its base is. We own left of center. We're progressive news, and we're the only paper of that kind in Canada. And so it would be foolish for me to move out of that segment. But I believe we speak for the bulk of Canadians. Canadians are progressive, I believe, and I think they are center, left of center. Maybe you got others that are a little bit right, that are more fiscally conservative or whatever, but I do think the Star speaks to the bulk of Canadians, and we will stay in that lane.
As you point out, the problem with going more fully digital, is that you're trading the print dollars that used to exist for digital pennies, effectively. And you make a spirited pitch for encouraging institutions and governments to pay more of those advertising dollars locally and to invest locally. You're calling for digital subscriptions, all those things, but let's be clear, it appears or it feels like a patchwork approach to a problem that is plaguing the entire industry. And so the struggle to find a sustainable model for funding local journalism. So what's your best guess when you look down the road? What's your best guess at what that model will look like when this business is done transitioning?
Yeah, it's another great question, and I can tell you one amazing fact that I'm not going to blow anyone's mind with it, but great journalism sells. And I think that, as I talked about, with our focus on better journalism, on hiring, we're one of the few news organizations that's been hiring. And I'll use the example of Althea Raj here in Ottawa. Althea, when Huffington Post closed down, I reached out to my team and I said, I'd love to get her on our team. And they said, yeah, we just don't have the money. We're not sure that we can make it happen. And the beauty of today is I can have them look at data, and we can look at Chantal Hébert. Susan Delcourt, others here in the Ottawa Bureau, and see what kind of numbers they generate. And I said to the team, if she can generate half of what Chantal can, then she's a winner. But what is amazing about Althea is that she was going into podcasts at the time. And that was a huge opportunity. We weren't doing any podcasts at the time. And now we have, with Althea, the #1 podcast, political podcast in the country. Kevin Donovan has the #1 podcast in Canada, with Death in a Small Town, the Nathaniel McLennan story. And so my point on it is, great journalism sells. We know it. I know when a great piece is written, or any piece is written, how many clicks, how many subscriptions were sold, how many eyeballs were on that page, and that makes it a heck of a lot easier as opposed to the old days when they were guessing or they were running tons of data and they didn't really understand it. So I actually think there is an unfair advantage, or not an unfair advantage, I think we have an advantage today, and it's just what we have to get better at is using data to understand our audiences. And what I explain to my team all the time is, if we can get bigger audiences, think about when we write that story on diversity or on the LGBTQ community or on climate change, that not many people, but we've got a big audience over here and we've put them in the right place, and we're going to get more eyeballs on that story. We're going to bring more credibility to that story. So leveraging the content is a very important part of it. And I think that there was this mindset that we just, this is the way we do it, and we can't change. We do a wheels section. So I get there, and everyone says, we have to do a wheels section. And we relaunched the wheels section, which was our moneymaker. And it was an abysmal failure. Why? Because people can get better content online now on reviews of cars and other things. And so we need to shift the thinking, and we need to look at where the audiences are and how we engage with them.
Do you think that's still possible given how splintered and kind of disrupted the media landscape is? That even with good journalism, there are outlets out there that are struggling to get eyeballs enough to be able to attract advertisers. Is it still possible?
I do think so. And I think that the biggest problem in our industry has been that it was a war amongst all of the news outlets, that it was a battle for readers, eyeballs, whatever. And what I've been asking my colleagues at the Post, at the Globe, and every other news agency is, if we work together, we can accomplish great things. And that means working, we can maybe even share content. We can work, we can put a stronger message out. We can come to Ottawa and talk to the parliamentarians about the issues and things like that. We can tackle one of the biggest issues right now is online harm and the attacks on our journalists. And if we're united in that, we can do things. But if it's me going out alone, I gotta do 1,000 speeches like this and hope that somebody in this room or a group of people in this room are gonna go out and knock on their MP's door and start raising some hell about it.
Just on that point, as you say, it's a very different environment now than it was when you and I were delivering newspapers when we were kids. So the reality is that if you're part of the MSM, as it's called in some circles, it's not to be trusted. The mainstream media is not to be trusted, and in fact, even viewed as an enemy. How do you go beyond preaching to the converted and into audiences that see papers like yours and other media like ours as the enemy?
To me, that is, that's a beach ball you've just thrown me because, and I say that respectfully, I don't mean, but I, again, being a neophyte to the industry and not really understanding it, and what I realized is the Toronto Star has been around for 130 years. Mm-hmm. There's a trust with the readers. When one journalist writes a piece, the editor, the managing editors, the chief editor, the publisher, the entire organization's name is on that. You think about it, like that's one piece that's written, and the importance of getting it right in that one piece. And so what I ask our team is, let's make sure that we're fact checking. Let's make sure that we're being balanced in our reporting. Let's make sure that we're being very independent on how we do things, and bring that sort of approach to everything that they do. We have a public trust editor. There's only one other news organization in Canada that has a public trust. He's actually he was here, he's here in Ottawa. I think Bruce is here. Bruce Campion, did I see you come in here? Bruce Campion, who's now our opinion editor. But that was Bruce's job. He was our ombudsman who had to deal with ensuring that the integrity of our organization and if you had an issue, you wrote and it was dealt with. Bruce and his team would essentially, if we had to write a retraction, we would, and we still do.
But that's well and good for the people who read you. What about those who don't and consider the mainstream press as the problem?
Yeah, I think the importance of we could spend 2 hours, and I could talk about social media, and I really think back to C18, C11, all these. They're very important. Why are they important? Because when I was a kid, we had the CRTC, and like it or hate it, the CRT served a very important role in this country. It protected our culture, identity, and it protected broadcasters, radio, TV, whatever, on content. And our airwaves were not filled with American. And now what we see, because we have a completely unregulated internet, is we have full infiltration through Facebook, Google, and anything else, no one regulating it. And so when 2 cops are shot in Barrie or in Edmonton, or a convoy happens here in Ottawa, is that Canadian? That's not Canadian. That is Fox News and other news organizations in the States and people online posting stuff that is creating that fear, creating those issues. And I believe that we need to regulate it for our sake and for our kids' sake.
So on that issue of what the government can do, you lobbied for Bill C-18, which would force big tech companies to share the wealth that a great amount of wealth that they get from linking to content to news media. Meta has threatened to block access to content if this bill goes through. Then what? What happens?
Yeah, well, they tried to do that in Australia and they failed, and there was a big pushback. And I'm hoping that our friends here in Ottawa use their force and might to get them to play fair. And I'm not asking, and we're not as an industry asking for anything that's unreasonable. They take 80% of our revenue. They take our stories and they publish them and they sell advertising on the back. How's that fair? How is that fair that they can take your work, my work, anyone who's writing an article, and it's being used to sell advertising, and we get zero from it, or 80. So I think, my ask in all this is, and we've been very clear with Google and Facebook, talking about Apple News, is help us. Help us. Money's great, but what I need your help is you've got global organizations and developers, and you have the ability to disseminate and teach us about SEO and all these. Help us. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking you to invest in our organization to help us get better so that we can compete.
You said also in your speech that you don't want to be seen as a charity. You're not looking for charity, but I want to try this with you. A few days ago, another local paper in the States failed. It was in Utah. It's called the Iron County Today in Cedar City. And that led the community to actually come together and raise money to try to bring it back to, and it is in fact operating again. I recognize the irony of asking this question to someone who's a businessman, but perhaps kind of appealing to your philanthropic side. If journalism is so integral to democracy and society, why should it be kind of beholden to commercial and markets? Why can it not be not-for-profit?
Well, it's interesting because the late John Hondrick and I talked a lot about this, and John had initiated a foundation, and the goal really was to fund journalism through high net worth individuals, through foundations donating to it, and so that if climate change was important to an organization, it would fund. And so we have actually had a tremendously successful program. We partnered with our team, Rob Cribb and company, have partnered with University of Toronto, the Dalai Lama School, and we have the Investigative Journalism Bureau. and the work they are doing is incredible. I don't think I was ever so proud as when I walked into our one of the meeting rooms. Rob asked me to join him, and there were 30 journalism and law students from Metropolitan University, from U of T, our own interns, journalists, and they were collaborating, and they were looking at assisted death and the data around it. And the goal really was, you know, if we can bring enough credibility to the story, think of the impact it can have globally. And so we've seen tremendous results with it. We put money into that, and we work together to collaborate on it.
But do you foresee a possibility of the business model being exactly that, a not-for-profit?
I think, you know, I think it's a combination of the two. You know, The Guardian is a very interesting, and we've looked at it. That's unique to a market and whatever. I don't know that we can recreate. La Presse is doing a good job of it. I just think we need to get better at what we do, right? I talked about it before. We had businesses, programmatic advertising, we spent umpteen millions on. All kinds of other, we had car leasing businesses that were, and these were all, a lot of them were money-losing businesses. And so we had, as I mentioned, a plant and other things. And all I've tried to do right now is cull it. Get rid of anything that's a distraction, that takes money out of our coffers, and what it allows us to do is focus on keeping the Star, our other 6 regional daily newspapers, and our community newspapers at stake. That's not to say you know, that some of them aren't going to falter over time. They are, because communities are changing. The community paper business was built on the back of flyers and local advertising. And that local advertising, COVID just did this to it. The flyer business is done. And so those community newspapers are now, a lot of them are struggling. And we're trying to figure out, and I'm trying to be, I'm not trying, I am being very considerate, because I know the importance to those communities. When you see, as I did on day one, coming out to Ottawa Valley and seeing an elderly woman get out of a taxi to walk up to the newspaper box at our paper there, to take the paper out of it, and then get back in the taxi to go home.
I noted with interest your appreciation of the legacy of Jim Travers. And I, having been a former foreign correspondent, I'm curious what your plans are in terms of funding a more robust plan for foreign coverage by the Toronto Star.
It's a tough one, because they're expensive to create bureaus. We have, I won't say that we've dabbled with it, but I'll use the example of Washington. Ed Keenan was in Washington. He was our Washington bureau. Trump's in power. Everyone wants to read about Trump and how crazy. Biden comes into power, and no one's reading those articles, sadly. And so we brought Ed back to Toronto. He's now, you know, we're proud of the work he's doing on the city. He's a great journalist. But Washington, and I've talked to Anne Marie Owen, our editor, about it, we'll always need to stay close to Washington. Alan Woods, who was in Moscow for us for a number of years, got pushed out, obviously, when the Ukraine happened. Was able and still is able to write about it, but isn't on the ground and able to provide. So I think, to answer your question, the opportunity to use freelancers, and the folks at the Washington Post were really the ones that educated me on the ability to create a network of freelancers around the world that you'll call on. And then if there is civil unrest in somewhere, you've got freelancers there that you can fire up, dial down, and then you got to rely on editorial and your editors to edit that and make sure that it is consistent and the quality of product is a great one.
I want to get to audience questions, but I have a couple more important ones I want to ask you before we go there. I'd like to quote you back to yourself. Obviously, real journalism costs money, and it has and continues to be more than ever the Achilles heel of this industry. So the question to you here on this stage is, how far will you go in keeping the Toronto Star financially afloat?
Another great question, and I can tell you this, that in my 2.5 years, 3 years almost of ownership, being the publisher, what I have recognized is that good journalism sells. And when you add Christine Dobby, Richard Warnica, Althea Raj, Stephanie Levitz here in Ottawa, they've all been winners for us. And so what we need to do is we just need to get better at how we manage our team, have them focus on beats and on things that people want to read about. Kids, as we talked about, Al and I were talking about, kids aren't reading papers, and they're not even really looking at the digital. So how do you engage them? I was just down in Florida watching my son play baseball, and there was a reporter covering the 17-year-old baseball game, and I went over to him. He was writing for the Palm Beach Post, and I just inquisitive, and I said, he goes, we went completely out of it, and then we got back into it. And he goes, you know what's amazing? Our eyeballs and the audiences that we have been able to get because of that have been remarkable. So much that we've got 3 reporters now going to high school games and reporting. And he said, so we're getting younger audiences, we're getting more eyeballs, and we're staying. And so if you go to their website now, investigative journalism, coverage of high school sports. We went from covering high school sports to completely pulling. When the cuts happened, we got completely out of it. And now we're looking at it. And there's also technology that you can use that pulls data, and we can then have our team, our journalists, then be able to compile that and write about it.
One has to admire the optimism with which you speak about this business, but the reality speaks of something very different. And so I guess what I'm trying to ask you to put another way is that you are extremely well positioned to, perhaps more than anyone else since Joe Atkinson, to determine the direction of this paper. Will you commit today to, doing more than just doing the right things? Will you go, into your pocket to save this paper?
I have been going into my pocket, and it's fair to say I have not taken a dime out of this, penny out of this business. I've been investing millions into it, and that's not stupidity. These are very sound business investments that I'm making to be able to support what we need to do. We had a very antiquated publishing platform for our digital, and we were leaving money on the table. We were not engaging enough. The quality of the experience, if you've looked at our app, it's improving vastly. But we had to make a decision to go to a new platform. It costs millions to do that, and we've done it, and we're doing it. And so to answer your question, I think everyone in this room and that's listening is going to be very pleasantly surprised with what we do with our publication over the next couple of years. And it's not, this isn't some guy just throwing money at a situation. I've got an incredible team. Neil Oliver, who is our CEO, 38 years in the industry, and he was sort of being put on a backbench, and I asked him to take over as CEO. He's got the love and respect of our organization. He's a newspaper guy through and through. And I've just asked our team to step in, and what I do is I just ask a lot of questions, and I bring, I think, just some very fundamental questions about it, about how. But the biggest thing that I just want to touch on was that whole area of, we had all these other distractions, and we were burning millions of dollars, millions, tens of millions, and we're eliminating all that. And it's now all focused on journalism.
I know you wanted to end on a positive note.
Yes.
You said, what if? What if the Toronto Star fails?
What if
the Toronto Star fails?
It would be a very sad day for Canada. I think that it would be a blow to society, for democracy, to democracy. The Toronto Star is too important to fail. And my pledge, I talk about it a lot, it's a public trust. I'm someone that's sort of guiding it through a period of time I don't even really think I own it. I think that the readers own it, our journalists own it, and I'm just a custodian of it. And so what I am trying to do is just bring sound, fundamental business acumen to running the business. And like I said before, we've been operating in a very antiquated model, and I'm hoping that with the moves that we're making, the Star doesn't just survive, but it thrives. And I'll use the example of the automotive industry. GM, Ford were the behemoths of globally, and most profitable car companies in the world. But BMW pops up, Porsche pops up, and they own a niche and a lane in the market. And I'm not saying this is a Star, but I'm just using it as an example. We need to own our lane, and we are the lane for the progressive voice in this country. And we need, I can't do it on my own. I need people to buy subscriptions. I need advertisers, and it's really, I'm leaving on a positive note. My favorite conversation is when I can sit down with a CEO of a company, of a bank, and talk to him about it. And I can ask him the $50 million in advertising, where they're spending it, and he's not really, or she is not really aware of how and what. And then when I sit down with their team and talk about everything I talked about today, they're like, of course we're going to be in. And when I can talk about a Prince subscriber who's been loyal for 30 or 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, I get the most amazing mail from subscribers, but who probably bought their kids or loaned them the money to buy their first house, helped them buy a car, pay their taxes, are good people. And what I can say to that CEO is, you're disrespecting a generation in here when you don't allocate it. And this isn't about me, trying to create some grandiose thing. It's a fact. Those people are loyal. They're the ones that write the letters to the editor. They're the ones I get the letters from every day, and they're the ones when you go on or online or whatever, they're the ones that speak up.
Thank you for taking my questions. We'll go to some audience questions now.
Great.
I believe there's a microphone.
I just came here to show people how this is done. I'll be very brief. Nala and I did talk about this, but I promised my students I would put this question. It's a variation. Years ago, Beelan Honderick gave a big speech at Carleton, and people still quote it. John's dad, Beelan, because he talked about the nature of objectivity. It was very important. In my days on Parliament Hill in scrums, we would do this thing called open mouth insert quote. We'd ask a question in hopes that that's what the person would say back. So I'm being transparent. My question to you is, and it's what you alluded to with Nala, can you, on this stage today, tell us you will not let the Toronto Star fail no matter what it takes?
Alan, you and I talked about it before, and I've talked to others that are here tonight about it. I promise you I am doing everything in my power to protect the Star, to ensure that it's around for another 130 years. And I promise you that if it does fail, it's not from lack of trying, it's from a lack of a limited engagement from others that have the ability to help us. We still need to sell advertising, okay? We subscriptions are key, but there's a generation that aren't buying subscriptions. And part of today, and we'll talk about it, is, I want to offer everyone a free 3-month subscription, because who doesn't have it, particularly your students, because I think you'll be delighted when you see the quality of content that our journalists are creating day in, day out. But there will be no. I'm 58, and I think I've had a little bit of success in my life. And as I said before, this isn't a charitable project. This is about, for my kids' sake, for future generations of Canadians, the importance of protecting an institution in this country that is critical to democracy and society.
Thank you very much. We have a long lineup on both sides, so we'll just alternate. So maybe start here. If you don't mind, just keep your questions very short, and we can get as many in as possible. Please go ahead.
Hello, thank you for the great talk. A short question. You mentioned the regulation of the internet, so I'm just curious if you can share a little bit more about this. Do you mean only financial aspects, who earn from posting the articles, or you are talking about the regulation of the information going on there over the social media and so on?
I missed that a bit because my...
I missed it as well. Can you just say it, please? Thank you.
How does social media...
How does social media use the news content?
No. I was asking, you mentioned the regulation of the internet.
Regulation, is that
Yes.
The regulation.
Very sorry, there's something wrong with the
Yeah,
sound here,
it's
so it's hard to hear up
reverberating.
here. So I think you said regulation, right?
Yeah, how do you see this regulation? What is this regulation about?
I'm sorry, someone has to repeat that for us.
The regulation of the internet. So, you know, I talked about it, and I think that our friends here in Ottawa have a duty. I'll use the example of one of my daughters, right? If one of my 12-year-old daughter is not in the best frame of mind, something went on at school, she got bullied or whatever, and she goes on, the algorithms pick up and they take her into a deep, dark hole, which could lead to something quite bad. And we are allowing these tech giants to go unregulated. We're allowing them to eat our children alive. And all I'm asking is that we need some form of regulation on it. How is it that someone can post something, we were talking about it before, something online anonymously, libelous, slanderous, or in the case of a lot of our journalists, a threat, a death threat, a harm? If you're a female of color working for a news organization, you're living with that day in and day out. And how should that be allowed? Because there's no accountability. It's really simple. So put the onus on the tech giants, put the onus on the pipeline, the carriers that are bringing it in to offer some form of code of conduct on what's on there and hold them liable. The same way that I'm being held liable if one of my team writes something that is slanderous or wrong.
Thank you. Over here, please. We'll try again.
We are here because of Professor Kesterton, and he taught my husband journalism. We have a deep respect for journalism. In the new world, artificial intelligence, and you just mentioned what your children are experiencing, you can put a few key words in and you can get a story out of that. So in your view, what would you say if that was happening in the newsroom? Or you could put a puffy coat on a world figure and say, oh, that person had that particular coat on, and a lot of people will believe it. So what are your views about using those kinds of things in the newsroom?
Technology is an amazing thing, and we have to embrace it. That's what when I talked about, and we were talking about print and whatever, and I'm trying to sort of reinvent us as a technology company. We need to embrace it, and we need to understand it. But ChatGPT can't take the place of a journalist. They're taking parts of it, and they're putting something out that is through a bot that's artificially created, and there could be inaccuracies in there, et cetera. And so I think that what we need to do is we have to definitely embrace technology, but we have to use it in a way, in a responsible way, that allows us to get better at what we do. And maybe I talk about the amateur sports thing. There are programs online where I can watch my kid's baseball game, and it's a parent is sitting at the game uploading all the data. That data then produces a report. Now I could have a journal, instead of sending a journalist to a game in Barrie, Ontario, I can have a report issued on that, and my team can go through, but someone has to own it and understand that and be able to bring credibility to it.
Thank you very much. We'll take one more here.
Hi, thank you for the talk. Purveyors of misinformation and malinformation online are connecting with audiences and creating a lot of context for information onslaught online. You talk about the onus on government and on the reader to be responsible, but I'm interested in what are contemporary newspapers not doing that's creating this gap where the Joe Rogans of the world can succeed and find audiences, but modern journalism, credible journalism, cannot.
Alan, we're going to have to ask you to repeat the questions because over here it's very echoey, so it's hard to get every word. Thank you. Thank you.
Why is it that misinformation is creeping in? What are you failing to do at the start to allow the Joe Rogans to come in and fill that
Okay. Yeah, again, I talked a little bit about what's going on in the U.S. and disinformation. And listen, turn on Fox News for a night and watch if you want to understand where the world is going and how they can politicize and create a controversy on everything and anything. Joe Rogan can do that. But with Joe Rogan, I took a shot at him, but at least at the end of the day, you could argue that he's got a base and he's trying to do whatever, right or wrong or whatever, and people will hold him account as they did during COVID. But again, I go back to the internet and the ability for anyone to post anything and have no repercussion. And how is that right? How do we allow that? So I think where we have, I won't say failed, is where we're investing is we have an initiative with Enthusiast Gaming, one of the largest gaming companies in the world, younger audiences. We're working with them now to be able to share our content to gamers, to a network of hundreds of millions of gamers around the world. And these kids aren't looking for 500 word, 700 word pieces or 2,000 word pieces. They're looking for 150 words. And so what we need to get better at is just understanding our audience and giving them what they want. And a big part of that is video. A big part of that is the visual experience around it. A big part of that is podcasting. And we've seen amazing movement in all those areas.
Okay. Thank you. Over here, please.
Mr. Bitov, last Saturday, down the road here at the Westin, at a fireside chat much like this one, to a crowd with perhaps different political views, the spokesman for Meta, that is Facebook Canada, said that if CFT18 passes, it's worth about $300 million a year to them. And if that was the case, this is not like Australia, that they will block Canadian access. So my question is, and Nala touched on this, but you weren't very clear, what is your plan B? What is the plan if C18 passes and if Canadian access is blocked? Then what?
So what is our plan if C18 doesn't pass? And
if Meta and Google block Canadian access?
It's a great question, and I think if I had a crystal ball, but what I'm hoping is that our parliamentarians do the right thing, and they hold them to account. And we did see that they backed down in Australia, and listen, they're very powerful global organizations that have hundreds of billions of dollars in their war chest to fight and convince and do whatever they need to do. But I've spent a fair amount of time, and I will again tomorrow on Parliament Hill, talking to cabinet ministers, our Minister of Heritage, etc., senators about it. And the amazing thing is that they are receptive, they are understanding, and I do believe they will do the right thing at the end of the day which is force them to play fair. And that's all we're asking.
Before we go back to the mics, there's another question from the online audience, also about C18. A social work student who regularly relies on CBC and Toronto Star as a source when he or she are deciding on topics, writing papers about social injustices and inequities in society. This person says, I'm interested to know about how Bill C-18 has affected reporters and journalists on the ground.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I talked a little bit about it before. The hope really is that C-18 gives us the money to reinvest in our newsrooms, to hire more journalists, to get our technology right. And this is, you know, a big part of it is just I've inherited an antiquated model, our industry is, and what we need to get a lot better at is how we disseminate, how we enhance that digital experience. And so I'm hoping that, you know, the funding through C-18 will allow us to reinvest in our newsroom and to reinvest in technology to allow us to be better and be able to share it globally. And that's an important part. And I usually do talk about this, but I didn't. Why, to your question about the importance of the Toronto Star, when I was in university a long time ago, and myself or my friends would go backpacking through Europe, as a lot of us did, you put a Canadian flag on the back of your knapsack. And what that signified was that you weren't American. But more importantly, what it signified is that people liked Canadians. Why? Because we're humble, we're polite, we're good, we're fun, we're honest. And I think that my hope for the Star has been that we own Toronto's largest market, or Canada's largest market. We are the voice of the progressives in this country. And so my hope was really, and is, and will continue to be, that we can be a postcard for Canada around the world. So that when one of our team writes a piece, that we're able to share that content, whether it's in Mumbai, Dubai, London, Paris, wherever, and that they can read about something amazing that our journalists have done, and what Toronto represents and the importance of Toronto and Canada, more importantly Canada, to the world.
Okay, please.
Saving the Toronto Star is a noble mission. I'm just wondering to what degree sports betting is part of the business model, and are you concerned about the social harms related to sports betting?
Sports betting was an interesting thing, and it is for us because, I mean, we see how big that has become, and we saw it as an opportunity to help fund journalism. We had content that we were creating, and we believe, and we have seen, and it's working, that if we can take that content and put it onto other platforms that people will pay for it, will utilize it, etc. The interesting thing about it, where I really came at it from, is we have 130 years of trust with our readers, and we have the opportunity to do it right. And I'll use the example of the cannabis industry, where floodgates open, everybody and their brother is opening a cannabis shop, and all these things are going on, and it almost feels like it was unregulated. I'm hoping that we can be the gold standard for the sports betting, because we have the ability and we have an obligation to our trust that we have with our readers to manage that, and that's mental health. That's being responsible about it, etc.
But there are people on your own staff who raised objections to the use of that kind of revenue to fund the work that you do. How did you address those concerns?
The same way I'm addressing it right now. We, you know, it's a big opportunity, and you talk about, you know, we've been doing something the same way for years and years. They started other things. They had contests and other things like that you could argue were the same, were just a different generation or different time that they were doing the same thing. But to me, the opportunity and what I talked to the team about is really that we can be the gold standard for it, that we can be the responsible ones doing it, that as we see something going sideways, the ability to manage it and get the messaging out there so that it is done in a responsible way.
So we're at the stage where we have more people than we have time for, so I'm wondering if we could do kind of a quick round of questions, if you don't mind. I know some of these questions
I'll be quicker too, I promise.
Yeah, and so if we could start here and kind of try to get, maybe we won't be able to take any more, I don't think, in the lineup. So please go ahead. A short question. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm Miles Rowe. I'm a first-year student here at Carleton. And I was just wondering, so obviously I'm part of the younger generation, and I realize that on social media apps, it's kind of just open to anyone. So there's a lot of like almost amateur journalists that don't really have any sort of education in journalism, and so they're able to just post anything. So what I've seen personally is a lack of primary research, and just everyone's just dragging in secondary research from different sources. So the Toronto Star obviously is able to provide like very, very skilled journalists. So can you see in the future maybe social media and big tech companies working in cooperation with these local news sources to provide the world with more like accurate and more reliable news?
What I'm trying to do day in and day out, and it's a great question because to sort of group everyone into that it doesn't work and it's dysfunctional is wrong. There are a lot of, and I see them, there are kids that come, I shouldn't call them kids, but young folks that come in and I talk to them and they want to be a journalist and they ask the right questions, but what anyone in this room who understands is it takes a while to really understand the skill of being a good journalist and having proper editorial on it and getting things right with it. And so my hope has always been we bring in through the intern program, through Enthusiast Gaming in our program with AFK, et cetera, a younger voice, a younger generation, and work with them to allow them to leverage our platform and be able to talk to new audiences. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Right over here.
So you mentioned that online hate as being like a prominent threat for journalism today. How does Toronto Star plan to protect contract journalists and freelancers after this transition from print to technology, especially when these contractors and freelancers are mostly from marginalized communities?
So it's about protecting, sorry.
In the world of online hate,
yeah.
It's one thing to protect your staff.
Yeah.
How do you protect freelancers and people who work on their own?
Yeah, so I'll just start at the very high level. The so-called Freedom Convoy here, we took immediate action. We put security in to work with our team to go in and support them. Freelancers, others that are working, we have a very active program in place that the second that anyone has a threat, we take every threat seriously. It gets escalated, and depending on the severity of it, whether we go to the police with it or whether we internally monitor it. But for me, there's all these other things I talk about, but I can tell you because I myself have been, I've had threats, death threats. When we published on the Greenbelt, I had a number of death threats, I can handle myself. I say that respectfully, but I do worry about our interns, our team, and so what we have done is that we ensure that they have any form of protection. We're asking law enforcement to get involved. They have to. We're asking governments to put policy in place and legislation in place to protect them. We have to. And so we're working hard on it.
Thank you very much for that question. Please.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Bedov. Presumably advertisers moved their advertising from newspapers to online, Facebook and Google primarily, and governments did as well because they perceived that was a better way to reach the audiences they wanted to reach. How do you plan to persuade them that's not true?
So, Google and Meta, they all went, they got the advertising because advertisers think that's the best way to reach people.
Yeah.
How are you going to convince them otherwise?
Convince the advertisers? Yeah, because we have real eyeballs that are consuming. I can tell you right now, and I can pull it up on my phone, how long someone is digitally reading one of our articles for. And I know on the back of that, our team through analytics can say we should be selling so much advertising on the back of that. But what happened was everyone went all in on Facebook, on Google, and these, as I mentioned, these young sort of buyers were, for the media agencies, it was an easy route for them to just say, place your money here and we'll measure it and everything else. Well, we weren't doing a good job at explaining to potential advertisers what we had to offer and getting better at how we use our machine to be able to attract eyeballs, to have better engagement. And so that's really been, a major thrust of what we've been doing right now.
A related question to that from the live Q&A online. Do the under 30s actually read a whole article, and how is reporting being reimagined to teach or to reach this demographic?
Yeah, that's the dilemma, and I'm hoping that surprise, like an amazing area, newsletters, right? Who would have been just an absolute home run for us? And but as I talked about, video, podcasts, better storytelling. How when we run, we're getting a lot better at it. We've got a long way to go. But the visuals on when we tell a story, how we get better engagement is quite compelling. And so, the hope is really that will attract those audiences and keep it. But, we haven't cracked the code, and I don't think anybody has cracked the code on that. It's going to take some time.
We have less than 10 minutes left, and would love to get all of you in. So please keep your questions short over here.
I guess I have 3 questions, but I guess I'll ask the most important one. So I guess when it comes to, like you mentioned subscriptions, but also people are very stingy with their money. And I don't think that a subscription is what they're thinking of when they're first thinking of, especially with inflation around. They're not exactly thinking of a newspaper when they're thinking of like food to buy. So, like, I get it that you're trying to like keep your stuff to survive, but what would you do in times like this where people don't necessarily have the pennies and dimes, forgive pennies, people don't necessarily have the dimes and nickels to give out?
Go ahead.
In high inflation, cost of food, how do you convince people to
subscribe? It's a wonderful question, and again, I'll go back to it, and I've said it 100 times, but I'm hoping that people in these tougher times still understand the importance of good journalism, of being informed, and the role that they can play in. Like we're going to go in this election in Toronto, and there's going to be 25 candidates, and the Star has stepped up with the United Way. We're hosting a debate, which is really an unprecedented, and we're going to elect someone that's going to shape our city. And you see and you read about what's going on in Toronto, right? I can tell you my own staff are fearful of getting on the TTC, that the homeless situation, the mental health situation is very bad. And so what I'm hoping, and I'm answering your question a long roundabout way, is that if you really care about your city, if you care about your country, if you care about society, that $1 a week, whatever it's going, and I'm offering them to people here as complimentary. But I'm hoping that that is a very small price to pay to be informed, to make a decision and ensure that the economic engine of Canada is protected during the next 4 years, because it is a very difficult situation. And that's not just Toronto. We see it in Vancouver, we see it in Edmonton, everywhere.
Thank you for a great question. Over here, please.
I'm not sure if you can quite hear me, but you have mentioned that Toronto Star advocates print, diversity, and internships. And one of the things that you have not addressed is generational gaps when it comes to circulations and journalism. As a journalist student, I would like to know, what is Toronto Star planning to do to close the generational gap?
So, I think I've been trying to answer that, but I think it really is, this initiative with Enthusiast Gaming Away from Keyboard that we're working with them. It's how we disseminate. It's the storytelling around our articles and looking for. We have TikTok. We actually do post on TikTok. We post on Instagram, and we have over 1 million followers on Instagram. We've got hundreds and hundreds of thousands on Facebook, and they do serve a purpose for us, and they're touching different audiences that we typically weren't paying any attention to. But I think that there's a, and it's not just me. As I said, I've talked to a lot of the publishers around the world, and we're all having this problem of cracking the code of being able to. My kids do not open a newspaper. I was reading a newspaper at the age of a couple of my kids. So we've got to get them inspired. We have to bring content to them that resonates with them, and we have to figure out where they are and how we can share that content with them.
Thank you. Right here.
Can you hear me okay?
Let's give it a try.
Okay. There is now documented evidence that exposure to trauma impacts negatively the mental health and well-being of journalists and media workers in Canada. As an owner, what do you see as your responsibility, and in particular, what specific investments are you making to support your staff and also, importantly, the freelance journalists that you mentioned who are on the front lines often doing this work for you?
So a great question again, and it may have been day 5 of my ownership that I addressed this with our HR team, and then we did a town hall where I talked, and we saw, at that point in time, we were 4 or 5 months into COVID, and we were seeing the impact on people's mental health. And so we have made it a priority to protect our team. We put crisis lines in place with third parties that are versed in dealing with mental health issues, and it's the one thing that I can tell you that I've consistently talked about with our entire organization, which is mental health, around protecting and being aware of it, and not only with your teammates, family members, friends, whatever. These are difficult times, and so we're doing all that we can to protect our team. And again, I'll point to the body of work that our team has done on mental health. It's been remarkable, and we continue to consistently deliver great reporting on it and bring awareness to it. I've had discussions with 3 of the mayoral candidates, and they point to the data and the articles that have been written by our team on it. So that says a lot to me.
This is a little unorthodox, but can we get 3 questions in a row very quickly, and we'll have them all answered together, please. Just proceed there. Thank you.
The future of journalism is uncertain. How are you specifically gonna get young journalists to want to stay in this industry?
Okay, thank you. Over here.
Thank you. I'll just like to start off by saying that I'm a child of a father who was a journalist, graduated from the School of Journalism from the 80s. So I grew up appreciating the importance of trusted and reliable and credible journalism. So I'm curious, Mr. Bitov, because you talked about being a father who's very passionate about print media. I'm curious as to what do you think, is there a role at the family level that a parent can play in passing down the appreciation, if you will, to children? Because they're children today, but they're the future of tomorrow. They're the adults of tomorrow. So I'm really curious to know about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The last one here.
I'll do this without the mic. I'm told my voice carries. So
Lovely. We can hear you.
I was in the Toronto Star. I was an editor there for many years, full disclosure. But I was there when they introduced ChartBeat, and had big screens. You talk in terms of getting eyeballs and things like that. And we now know from Fox News that decisions that were led by a desire to maintain the audience were what drove them to make the editorial decisions that they did. I'm wondering if you could just talk very briefly about the contours between what's important and what's going to get eyeballs.
Let's start with the last one first,
Okay.
and we'll work backwards.
So what I always say to our team is, let's use the data as a guide and helping us understand our audiences, and use it. Craig, I talked about how hiring journalists and the success that we've had by using data. But the thing that I can assure you, and it goes way beyond me, it goes through our entire organization over decades, is about doing the right thing, and that means really the quality of journalism, the way we go about it. We have, the Star is very unique. And I heard it here when I was in Ottawa a year or so ago at a dinner, and I had a number of journalists come to me from other media outlets, and they said to me, whether they worked at the Star or not, I always wished I could work at the Star. And why? Because the Star had a sense of purpose, and my organization doesn't have that. I don't take any responsibility for it. That was Joe Atkinson, that was the Atkinson principals, that was Beelan Hondrick and John Hondrick and others that led the way. So I will reiterate, I am merely a custodian, and I'm trying to protect an important institution in this country, and that institution has been doing something, and it's been quite successful. It just needs a new set of eyes and maybe a fresh approach to it.
And if you could tackle those last two questions, which are somewhat related. The one was addressing you as a father and saying, how is it that you can get parents to have to encourage kids to consume journalism? And the first was also just how to encourage more young people to become journalists.
Yeah, I have this conversation a lot, and as the money became tighter and we pulled out of things, we had a very successful school program where we were in thousands of schools. We were in public libraries. We had great exposure, and then as things started getting tight, we pulled out of everything. And somewhere in there is the balance of what you need to do to be able to engage those audiences and be able to have a connection to them. For me to say to my 18-year-old son, hey, Brody, start reading the newspaper because I think it's going to be good. No, it needs to start in schools. And what I love about it is there are schools where in the curriculum, teachers are putting forward that you should read a newspaper, that you should be informed. Do you understand the difference between opinion and a headline and whatever? And so that gives me a lot of hope. And I think that what we need to do is just get better at communicating, allocating some money. But I do, to me, it's one of the easiest conversations that I have is when I sit down at a school with a teacher or with a principal and I talk about it, and they go, of course we should be doing it. Of course we should.
Jordan Bidoff, thank you.
Thank you.
Very much for taking our questions and answering them. Really appreciate talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
So I want the two of you to stay where you are for just a moment, and there's a present in this box. So I'm leaving it here for
pot of money?
Leaving it here for suspense. You already got lots of money. You're going to spend it on the Toronto Star. So I just quickly want to thank all of you for coming out this evening, Thank you to our hosts, Dominion Chalmers, for this fabulous spiritual place to have this really important conversation. Student volunteers for helping this evening, my dean for coming out at a stressful time. Thank you very much. Nala for your hosting work. And Jordan especially, as I said at the start, it's not easy wearing the mantle of the savior of quality journalism. So, and I hear the emotion in your voice, and it's really very much appreciated. I take your advice about these conversations that you have with people about journalism. So when you're a journalism professor, you're like a doctor at a party where people want to show you their sores and things. But they come after journalism professors. What are you doing about journalism? What about this story and that story and the quality? First thing I ask people now, say, I'd just like you to tell me, can you list for me the news organizations to which you subscribe? And they're often blank stares. And I tell them, listen, I guess I care about your opinion, but if you're not paying for any news, I care a lot less. You are forfeiting the right to criticize journalists in this environment if you do not buy and pay and contribute to local journalism. So I have something for you. We know what a basketball, sorry, we know what a fan you are. Thanks. We know that you saluted the Ravens right off the top. So I asked around at Carleton. Oh, right. Really special. This is a game ball from the championship game, and it is signed by all the players from both the men's and the women's Ravens. So I just want to remind everyone, please exit this way and go straight across the hall because there's a reception waiting for you with some food and drinks. Thank you very much.